Sorry about that. So today we're going to talk about the final steps to take to finish your map and to export the final product. The general properties can be accessed by either clicking Project on the menu ribbon, then finding Properties on the drop-down list, or using the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-P. Here you can name your file and make sure all of your data of the specific project is using the same directory and using the same project home. You can also change the selection color under this tab. This will change the color of any objects you select using the Select Object tool. And the background color will simply give you the option to change the background of your map to whatever you see fit. Me and Gillian were talking, we both use blue a lot to represent water. And this will do all of your layers at once rather than editing it layer by layer. Another important feature under this tab is the measurements. Again, you want to make sure all of your measurements on each layer is the same and any analysis you do is using the same measurement. You can switch from metric to standard here. Next, we have the print composer. So once you have all of your general properties set to what you need, you can go to print layout by either clicking Project in the menu ribbon, then clicking New Print Layout or using the keyboard shortcut Control-P. QGIS will prompt you to give your project a title, which you can see at the top of the left corner after you click OK. You don't have to do this immediately. If you click Layout in the ribbon menu, it will give you the option to rename your project. So once you've hit OK to the project title, a window with a blank page like this one will appear. You'll also see a list of options on the left side of the window. This is where you will find all of the items you need to add, including the map itself. And on the right side, there's a window that will list out all of your items as you add them to the layout page. This will allow you to toggle between each element you've added to your map. The items property window in the bottom right is where you can edit the item you currently have selected. So a standalone map should have five things other than the map itself. A map title, a legend, a scale bar, a north arrow, and I've always been told to put the projection or coordinate system I use. And also I always put my name on the map, but this is just if it's standalone. If you're making a map for like a publication or something where you'll be referencing the map in your text, then you pretty much only need the scale bar and the north arrow and maybe a legend if you're using something, if you're making a map for more than just like identifying a place. So like I said, the little options ribbon on the left is where you'll find all the items you need to add. It is possible to insert multiple maps. Once you click the Insert Map tool, which is indicated on the slide, it will give you a list of all the map options you have to add. QGIS makes it super easy to add all the other elements you need with the insert tools listed. So once you select the item you want to add to the map, the mouse turns into a little pointer and you can just click the area on the blank page you want to add the item. A pop-up will then show up to allow you to size the item or the map, but you don't have to do this right away. You can easily adjust all of your items after you've added it to the map. So from a cartographic viewpoint, you want to think about your visual hierarchy when you're making your map. Obviously, you want the actual map itself to be the first thing that viewers look at, then followed by the title. You want people to be like, what's this about? Okay, title, this is what it's about. And then the legend, you want that to be the next thing. Then the north arrow and scale bar should be the last things that catch the viewer's eye. So like I mentioned earlier, you can edit and reformat any of the items on your layout with the items property in the bottom right. If you select the north arrow, you will see different options of arrows. I typically choose simpler designs because, like I just said, you want the north arrow to be one of the last things the people see, unless you, for some reason, have your map south oriented or east oriented. Then you probably want your viewers to know that it's not north oriented. So any labels or words you add to your map can also be changed in this window. Once you add a text square to the layout, this is where you can type what you need to the label. I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but you want to make sure all of your fonts are consistent across the whole map. You can also add a frame or fill in the background text and change the color of the text in these properties. So I don't know about y'all, but I've been learning about the importance of a legend pretty much since elementary school. So you pretty much always want to make sure this is on your map, unless of course you're just like showing where something is and you reference the map in your text of whatever you're doing. But also I think this is pretty important that you want to like edit and like make sure it looks nice. So once you add the title, or once you add the legend to the layout, you can go to properties and there will be an option for the title. QGIS is different from ARC because ARC will default you a title and the title will be legend. You don't want your legend title to be legend because we all know what that is. So I typically just don't even put a title on my legend, but you can if you think it's necessary, just super general. This is what you're looking at. And then you also want to make sure to add any data items listed on the legend and don't use their file name, meaning you want to delete any underscores and use proper and consistent capitalization for each item. You also want to make sure that what is on your legend is also actually on your map. So if you have data in your table of contents that you didn't actually use, you can and you should hide that from the legend properties or in the legend properties. You also have the option to add a frame or background to your legend. Just keep in mind the visual hierarchy and also make sure you're not hiding anything important on the map itself when using these. But you also want to make sure your legend is readable. And the last thing we have to talk about is the scale bar. There's not really much to say about this other than you want to keep all of your units of measurement consistent. And you want to make sure the number on the scale bar actually makes sense. For me, I usually just try to keep it consistent. Make sure the scale bar is like not too big. The size of it makes sense on the map. And I typically make sure like the halfway mark is a 5 or a 0, and same for the last mark on the end. In the item properties, you can change the style of your scale bar, the units of measurement, and the amount of segments or breaks along the scale bar, and of course the font of the text and the numbers. Okay, so once you have all of the necessary items on your map and you've made it look nice and it tells the story you're trying to portray, you can export the map. QGIS gives you a super simple way in the ribbon bar along the top of the layout screen. You can export your map as an image, a PDF, or an SVG. You just specify the name of the file and the folder you want to save it in, and what type of file you're saving it as. And that's it. So I'll hand it back over to Gillian.
Okay. So as per usual, now that we've kind of talked about everything, we're going to go ahead and kind of apply and kind of like see everything in action. So for demo 4, what we're going to do is use all of the poll data that we previously collected, I think in the first workshop, and create like a final like pretty map. And so you should have been able to download demo 4 and 4-2 off of the list of like files available in the NEAR website. So all I've done so far is bring in the 2 files. So can everybody see my GIS screen before I assume everyone sees it? Any thumbs up or? Yeah, cool, awesome. Don't want to make the same mistake as last week. So all I've done here is bring in demo 4 and demo 4-2. And in demo 4, if we go under our layer properties, I've also gone ahead and categorized everything by this pole value. So all I've done is drop down to categorize and then also use my value pole. There's only 3 attributes: state name, state abbreviation, and pole. So this pole number represents the number of people per state, like it did previously when we worked with this data. And I'm keeping my map really colorful because I think of all the times to keep it colorful, I think most of the time when we're working with like technical publications and like more kind of like proper maps, grayscale is going to be what is like more like acceptable. So for the purpose of this, let's be colorful, fun, and bright. So I used this color ramp. There's the Viridis, but there's plenty of different other options. Like I said, I typically use grays, but you can use whatever kind of like fits your fancy for this one. And what I've done is I've classified, and each unique value has its own color, which we've talked about symbology before and talked about the difference between categorized and graduated. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that. The only thing that you can like really make note of is for all other values, I deselected it just so that we don't even see it. That way when we make the legend, it probably will still pop up, but the fewer things to like delete on the legend that are like extraneous, the better. So now that I've talked through kind of how I got here, I then want to go ahead and talk a little bit about layer properties, or just like the general properties that Alyssa described in the very beginning. So you can either drop down under project and go under properties, or use that shortcut, Control-Shift-P. And so we have like individual properties for each layer, right? So that was where we just were when we were looking at the symbology for demo 4. But what's kind of nifty is that we also have project properties. So in this window, we can change the background color and even like the selection color for the entire like map screen. So right now my color is light blue. Of course, you can change it to anything that like makes sense for the map. Most of the time, I'd say mine is white. But so for right now, light blue works great. And selection color is yellow. Sometimes if I have things in my map that are yellow and that my selection color is yellow, it gets kind of difficult to see what's selected and not. So that's why it's also useful to just know that under your general properties, you can change that color. And then that way you have that contrast for when things are selected or not. Okay, so now we can kind of jump into our print composer. So what I want to first show you is under project, all y'all will be clicking on new print layout. Because I've gone through and like done this once already, just to kind of make sure that the demo like makes sense and flows. I already have my demo 4. And I just want to show y'all that when you click on new print layout, it'll ask for a name and it'll pop up a blank map screen. But when you come back to that, so I've already done all of that. But when you come back to it, you can just click on like the name of whatever you saved, and that layout and like face will all be saved. So you don't have to like go back through and redo any of your work. Like your print composer is saved in its own like individual like file. But so at the end, we're gonna have something similar to this, maybe not exact, but I just wanted to kind of show you what that looks like once you already have a print layout available and like a link to go to. So we're going to create a new print layout. So just Control-P. It'll ask for a name. So for me, I'm just going to call it Demo 4-2. And then we're going to click OK. And so now we are in a brand new blank print composer. And so like Alyssa said, here are all of our tools. On the left-hand side, we have our items window, item properties in the bottom right-hand side. So the very first thing we're going to do is pull in our map. So that is this blank scroll looking button. So add map. And then we're able to drag across to how large or like what size we want that map to look like. So I'm going from the very like 0, corner of this white screen to the opposite corner. And it'll bring in the current layout of the map. So however it like currently looks on your maps view, that's what it'll bring in as. So if for whatever reason you bring it in and it's not exactly like placed where you want it to be, what you can do is go under your item properties. So my map is already selected. So everything in my items property is going to correspond to this first map. And you can even see the name here is map 1. So this is my first map. And under items properties, you then have the ability to select on interactively edit map extent. So once that's selected, just using my mouse, I can scroll in and out and change where exactly the map is placed. So that way I can kind of like fine tune things and make it exactly where I want it to be located. And then once I'm like good with wherever the map is set, which for the purpose of this demo, I'm like having Florida just have a little bit of edge between the edge of the right side of the map and Texas having a little bit of space by the left side of the map. What I'm going to do next is just simply like click on the selection tool to kind of get off of that. That way I don't accidentally move or toggle that map anymore. So the first thing that I'm going to kind of set on top of this map now that we've brought it in is going to be my north arrow. The north arrow is probably one of like the easier things to bring in. And for the most part, like it's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is select this north arrow button, the add north arrow, and then select anywhere on the map screen. I typically keep my north arrow in the upper left-hand corner, but that's not really a rule, just kind of wherever makes sense in the map. There are plenty of times where I've put it pretty much in every corner, just wherever it's visible, but not like taking away from the centerpiece of the map. So here, I'm just going to place in the upper left-hand corner. It'll pop up with this new item property box. Everything looks fine by default. So I'm just going to click OK. And as you can see, this arrow is massive. So what we're going to do is just take the bottom corner and make it more appropriately sized and kind of just place it there. When I'm actually selected on my north arrow, you can see that the items property window pops up with the option to change the image. So the really cool thing about these SVG images is that you can bring in your own, as well as like the QGIS software itself has a ton of default images for you to pick from. So if you go under the arrows window, you can see here that there are just a ton of different north arrows that you could pick from, some with like the letter N above it, the full compass. So really any like image or ideas that you have for your map, it's probably in here somewhere. But yeah, so once I kind of click off of that north arrow, you can see the items property window goes blank because I'm no longer like selected or trying to edit a specific component of my map. The second thing that we're going to add on top of this map is going to be the title. So that's going to be adding one of these text boxes here. So you can just do an add label. And then once again, just select roughly where you want the item to be placed. And then all default settings for this new item property window is always appropriate. So once again, the box is like really large. So we're just going to go ahead and bring that in, make it a little bit more appropriately sized. The text itself right now is just some like, you know, filler text. So what I'm going to label this as is just QGIS tutorial, just to have some form of text to display. And as you can see right now, the text itself is pretty small, and it's also pretty difficult to see against this light green background for the US. So what we're going to do is select the text box again to pop up this properties window. We're going to change the font first. So on this font box, if you click on the box itself, it'll bring up the text format box. And this is typically what all of your editing your text is going to look like when you're using Print Composer. Is you're going to see this like just box that says font in it, and then it'll bring up this text format box. Here you can select different fonts, which like Alyssa mentioned, it's always kind of common practice to keep the same font throughout. I also like to just typically bold my titles, and then also I think somewhere around 28, 26 is going to be appropriate. That's kind of more, this is more of an art than a science or a list of like standards. I'm also going to go ahead and underline my title and see what that looks like. So it's definitely getting better, right? It's a little bit easier to see. I think to really like kind of polish this off a little bit more, what I'm going to do is go and scroll down under the items properties and add a frame and also a background. So I'm just selecting these two boxes. And so here, now we have that white background, which makes it just so much easier to see. But we can also see that like the Q in QGIS is all the way to the left of the text box. So that kind of doesn't look very balanced. And if we just bring this in, sure, that like kind of helps balance it out a little visually, but there should be an option to simply like shift that text over a little bit. So first what we can try is just to horizontally align it in the center. And if you, sorry, I don't want to move too fast so that y'all didn't see exactly what I did. So under horizontal alignment, under appearance, all I did was select center. And when I kind of toggle off of this so you can finally see the text box, now the text is centered within the box itself. Another option for you when you're adjusting font is you can also go under your horizontal and vertical margins and increase and decrease that as well. So if I increase my vertical alignment, you can see the text slowly drifts down. But sometimes that's really useful, and it's good to know that it's there. So I'll go ahead and also make my vertical alignment in the middle. So horizontal alignments in the center, vertical alignments in the middle. And I think that's pretty fair for my title for this map. Really the only other things that we have to add now are the scale bar and legend. So let's go ahead and do the scale bar next. So that is this kind of ruler looking object on the left-hand side of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and click add scale bar. I typically make my scale bars in the bottom right-hand side of my map. So I'm going to click roughly in that region and click OK. Once again, probably the first thing I do is just kind of make this default box a little bit more reasonable to center it a little bit better. For whatever reason, it's always really, really large compared to what I actually want it to be. So now that this selection box is a little bit more manageable, now we have a bunch of different options for how we want our scale bar to look. This is currently single box. So under our main properties and style, you can see that that's selected as single box. So that's that black and white alternating rectangles. But you also have the option to do line ticks, which is kind of what I prefer. And you can even select where the ticks are. So line ticks middle is going to have the tick marks themselves go all the way through the line. Down has the ticks starting at the line and only progressing down. And for the most part, I'd say I do line ticks up. That's like my own personal aesthetic that I like. Of course, you can do as you will with this. So find whatever you feel looks most aesthetically pleasing for you. Then under units, the default is kilometers. I'm going to select feet just because obviously feet, you have these like much larger numbers right now with all of these commas. And so that doesn't look maybe as clean as we want it to be. So what we can do to further like edit this is once feet is selected, we can customize our number format. So I'm going to click on customize next to that number format title. And now what we can do is go under category. And instead of doing a number, we can go under scientific. I really like this option for numbers, and maybe that's just because of all of my time in school that I feel like scientific annotation just looks very clean and crisp. So now instead of having tons of zeros and commas, we see a little bit more condensed version. The only other thing I really want to include with this scale bar is when we scroll down a little bit further under the segments option, we have the ability to add segments to the left and right of our like zero datum. So right now, we have 2 segments on the right-hand side. And that's why we have this 1, 2 tick marks. I think 3 is typically what I go with, or a little bit more than that even. And that size kind of works for me as well. If you like to, feel free to keep it at 2. A lot of this, like I said, is more of an art and more of like what visually appeals to you and what you're trying to display. So basically everything we're going over right now is just to show you that the ability to do these things is out there, and then pick what's most appropriate and what looks best for you. So I'm going to go ahead and go with 3 segments to the right. Everything else by default is pretty good. Again, you can always change your font and where these numbers are placed in relation to the ticks. You can change the length of the ticks. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and add a frame and a background again, because in general, I feel like that's almost always a good call, just to help differentiate your scale bar from your map space itself. And like with everything in GIS, you can change the color and the width and how exactly these frames and backgrounds look. But the default for right now is completely fine and appropriate. So I'm gonna make this a little bit tighter. And when I deselect, I like that for my scale bar. I think that looks fine. And really that leaves us with our legend. That's going to be kind of one of the last things on this map that we're going to add. So to add a legend, excuse me, to your map space, you're going to go ahead and go to the left-hand side and click Add Legend. And then I'm going to put that in the bottom left-hand corner of this map and click OK. And by default, your legend is going to be pretty unaesthetic and pretty ugly for the most part, as with most default legends, I feel. So the way that I kind of go around and kind of make this look prettier is under your main properties window for your legend. The first thing I do is you have this box for legend items. If you select auto update, basically what that does is it brings in everything in your layers window. That's everything that's currently selected in your layers. So that's why we see this demo 4-2 and our demo 4. So demo 4-2, it really doesn't do anything for us to see this color for this large area. So what we're going to do is deselect auto update so that Q stops trying to show us every layer that is currently on. And then when I select on demo 4-2, because like I said earlier, it doesn't really do anything for us to have that label at all, we can then select this minus button, and that will remove it from the legend itself. And what's great about that too is we can also individually select items within that color scheme for demo 4 and get rid of them as well. So that yellow that I was talking about, that's our null value. Since we don't have any null values and nothing is yellow, there's really no reason to include it. So we can go ahead and select that and remove it as well. So now that we have just the items of interest for us, demo 4 as our layer title doesn't really tell us a lot. But what's great about deselecting auto update is we can change that name for our layer. Alternatively, you could change the name of the layer itself and bring it in, but that's not necessary, right? You can just change everything in Print Composer. So what I'm going to do is double click on demo 4, just like the name itself, and then it'll bring up this label properties window. And so here, what I'm going to name this label is going to be number of participants. Okay. And then we're going to go back to our legend item properties. And something I like to do, which I know Alyssa was saying that it's kind of redundant almost to label your legend. I like it. And so most of the time I will include at the very top of this legend main properties window, you can add a title. I like to have legend there. If it doesn't suit you, it doesn't suit you. But I'm gonna go ahead and have that there. And another thing is if you have more than one map, because as Alyssa said as well, you can bring in more than one map, doing the exact same thing we did to bring in the first one. And so if you wanted the, if you wanted the legend to be for a different map, you could do so like here under map 1. But since we have just one map, there's only one map in which to create a legend for. But the same goes for a scale bar as well. You could have your scale bar be associated to a different map or whichever map you're looking at that time. Which at the very end of this tutorial, I'll bring in another map, and that might make a little bit more sense then. So what I've done is I've labeled my legend as legend under this title, underneath the main properties. And now what's really left to be done is to go ahead and make the actual fonts and sizing within the legend a little bit more appealing. Because right now it's still kind of small. It's all clustered in the left-hand corner of this box. It can be better, right? So what we're gonna do is scroll down in the items properties. And here is a list of different options for us. So I'm gonna go under fonts and text formatting first. And under legend title, that'll change that font for the word legend. So I'm going to go ahead and bold that and make it just a little bit larger. So just 18 font, bolded, but keep everything else the same. Next, what I'm going to do is we have group headings and subgroup headings. So the number of participants is going to be a subgroup. You can almost think of the subgroup headings as just like the name of the layers themselves. If you had a group heading, what that would be is let me toggle out of Print Composer really quickly. So we have our 2 layers, and if you right click, you can add a group, which the ways that I've used groups in the past would be, say I have a set of layers that are going to continuously change. So I had the same data for 4 different years, right? So I have a 2016, 17, 18, and 19 data set, and it's all the same spatial data, just for different years. So I could make a group called 2016 and have all of that data for that year. So it'd be for the same location, same type of data. The only thing changing is time. So then when I go into my Print Composer, I have these different groups for these different years in which I'm working. But that's what the Print Composer is referring to when you have your group headings. But we don't have any groups right now. We just have our 2 main layers. So those are under our subgroup font. And for our subgroup font, I want to go ahead and make this also just a little bit larger, and also go ahead and underline it. Now, the only other font that we have is the actual numbers associated with our legend itself. And those numbers are also very small. So let's go ahead and make sure that they're nice and easy to see. So I'm going to make them 18 font. And for alignment, let's see what putting them in the center looks like. So that looks okay. I almost feel like we should just move everything to the center as well as the colors. But for right now, I'm going to move the numbers into the center of the column and kind of keep it at that for now. Under spacing, right, we can see that a couple kind of spaces down, we can increase and decrease these like spaces between things. So the space between like the actual title, legend, and number of participants is kind of large. So what we can do is decrease that space below and kind of make it a little bit more compact. I think that in itself helps out a lot. I also think that if we center our legend title, that also helps quite a bit. So now we're starting to look like a real, like presentable legend. I also like to, if I'm going to have a frame and background on one of my kind kind of features of my map. So like if I'm gonna have a background and a frame around my scale bar and my text, it's a good idea to include it around the legend just for consistency's sake. I think it looks crisper that way. And then the only other thing really we could do is we could manipulate the symbols a little bit. So the symbols are going to be those boxes of color. So you can make these a little bit larger and easier to see. Like always, it all depends on really what you want to do. You can make these super wide. And then, so say I make these really wide, and then I go back under my text formatting for my items, and I line it left again. We could kind of make a case that that looks decent or all right. I like having longer color widths just because it's a little bit easier to see the color if there's more of that color out there. But where this sits right now, I think it looks fine. I think it looks good. But kind of really the main takeaway I want you to get from this is that if you can think it and like creatively want a specific aspect of your map to look a certain way, there's a way to do that in your print composer. And so more or less like whatever item that you're editing, you're going to go under your item properties for that. And there's just a ton of different settings and options for every single type of graphic that's going to be put onto your map. So we've added a north bar, we've added a text box, a scale bar, and a legend. The only other thing that I think is useful to show you guys how to do is to add another map as kind of like an inlaid map. And the reason why that can be useful is if you have, say, a study site in wherever you are in the world. So if you have a study site in Tampa, Florida, and you have these really zoomed, honed in maps, it's sometimes useful to be able to have a map of the continental US and be able to show like, here's Florida, and then have that larger map that's that zoomed in contrast. So to kind of give you an idea of what that would look like is we're gonna go ahead and add another map and just go ahead and make it a rectangle kind of just in the center of the Gulf, because that's where our largest like space without polygons is. So I typically, if I'm going to have a map inlay, I would put it somewhere in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen. If we did that for this map, I'd probably make this a little bit smaller and push it off to the right. But just for the purpose of like the example, I'm going to just leave it in the middle of the Gulf. I'm not even going to like touch the scale bar. So this is purely just for demonstration purposes. So now we have a second map, right? And the map by default is going to look the exact same as our original map. But what we can do is when we select this map, we see now under item properties that we're editing map 2. And what we can do is interactively edit this map and zoom out to see the entire US. So now it gives us a little bit better idea where in the world we are. So like I was kind of saying before, if we had a field site somewhere zoomed in Florida, where it wasn't like blatantly obvious where in the world we are, we could also have this second map here to show us a little bit more like, just to give us more like bearings of where we're at. Another kind of good feature to know about is that you can add a marker or a shape, or even just like if you wanted to add a north arrow, but then make that north arrow a star, then you can kind of further emphasize what area in this inlaid map that you're working on. With your inlaid maps as well, and even with this larger map, what you can do too, just to kind of give you an idea of how to like differentiate the two, because as it sits right now, the blue in this inlaid map, if you select off of it, that blue kind of just blends into the blue of the first map. But you can differentiate these two maps by selecting on our map 2 and scrolling down and adding a frame to it. So you have all of the same options to visually like change and alter this map, as you do with a lot of the items and features in the print composer. So I've added a frame to this map. I'm going to go ahead and select off of that. And now you can see that it's a little bit more clear where our inlaid map starts and ends versus our larger one. But yeah, so this is inlaid maps. Basically, we're adding more than one map to your print composer space. I'm going to go ahead and delete my second map just because that was for the purpose of just like the example itself. Once you have a map that you're like pretty happy with how it looks, you can go under layout and then finally export. And you have a couple of different options. You can export as an image, an SVG, or PDF. I typically export as an image, and then you're able to kind of pick which image type works for you or which one you feel is best. So I'll just do a JPEG for this one and click save. And then it'll give you the option of picking your resolution and then as well as like your height and width for your map. So if you're about to use this figure for a publication, sometimes they have certain requirements on what resolution this image needs to be in order for it to show up crisp in that final document. But for this, I think we're fine with all of our default settings. We can click save. And then when we go onto our desktop, we're able to see that that demo format was saved. And the only other kind of like tips and tricks that I want to share with you is that, especially when I was first learning Q, I found the print composer to be something I'd wrestle with, and that was kind of like difficult and non-intuitive. So you can always feel free to kind of, if you just had your blank map and you didn't add anything on top of it, like a North Star text box, you could export that image and then even bring it into PowerPoint. And then from PowerPoint, you can add in your North Star and you can add in your text box. Really, the only thing that you couldn't add in when you're using PowerPoint is your legend and your scale bar. But those are items that you could have in Q and then export that image and bring it into PowerPoint and edit text and images a little bit easier there. That's something that I still do sometimes. Like if I have multiple figures, like figures A, B, and C, I'll do the A, B, and C in PowerPoint and line up all of my figures in PowerPoint instead, and then export from there. So definitely don't feel locked into Q and don't feel like this is the absolute last like output for your map. There's definitely a lot of other softwares and like kind of tools and tricks that you could complement this with. Yeah, so with all of that being said, let's make sure that there aren't any pressing questions or no one's tried something that hasn't worked yet before I toggle back. Okay, I think seems like from the chat that everything seems to be okay. No critical errors. Okay. Something else that we could talk about kind of like very briefly too is once you have something selected, you have like this eye here. So you can turn this on and off if you want to focus on something in particular, which when you're doing editing and really fine tuning a map, sometimes that's helpful just to really be able to focus on specific sections. Yeah, so let's go back into our Google Slides. And really, this is kind of the end of our workshop. This last one is a little bit shorter than the others, but really what I want to kind of end on is that there are so many free resources out here for Q. I really started this workshop by really harping on the fact that this is a free and open source software, and that gives us the flexibility and ability to do a lot through this software. And so with that open source kind of like attribute, there's so many free resources for learning Q on the internet. I'm completely self-taught from like YouTube videos basically and QGIS manuals. So there's definitely so much out there. And if you ever run into a problem, I'd say 99% of the time, Google has your answer or the forums have your answer. QGIS Uncovered is the series of videos that I personally walked through like every single one of them. And by the end of it, I had a really solid working knowledge of Q. Hopefully this workshop has gotten you at least halfway or most of the way through what these videos would get you to, so that you feel like confident at least in understanding what layers are, how to bring data in, a little bit about the spatial processing and output for maps. But this series on YouTube is really, really great. I definitely love it. I was going to say the second item, the first link there is a extension publication written by myself and Dr. Eric Sparks at the Mississippi State University. And so basically what this publication does is it will walk you through the step-by-steps of how to create a map of your choosing. What's really nice about the extension publication is that it has a tree diagram. So depending on what you want to accomplish and how you want your map to look, you'll kind of toggle through the tree diagram and it'll tell you, oh, do you want to add this item? Go to this section of the publication. So I think that's pretty useful. And like I said before, it goes step by step with images and examples. Then underneath that is the GIS Stack Exchange. That's a really great forum. The QGIS community in general is really helpful and really detailed. So these forums are awesome resources, as well as just the manual for QGIS itself. That's that docs.qgis.org. And then lastly, I think that last link is the link to this workshop series. So if we went through something and it didn't quite click the first time, or you want to hear it again, or anything like that, definitely feel free to go back through the workshop videos, go back through the activities themselves. Because like I said, all those activities at the end of each workshop, I have videos of me walking through those activities. And then also always feel free to like reach out to me, or I mean, you could probably even reach out to Alyssa. I'm throwing her name out there as well, but yeah, definitely feel free to reach out to anybody as a part of this workshop and ask questions and learn more, because that's how we get better. I had a lot of people helping and supporting me as I learned GIS, so definitely let me know if you ever have a specific problem or question. And with that, we are on our last slide, which Sarah, I don't know if you want to talk about it or.
Sure. So yeah, I just want to say thank you again for everyone who has attended, and thank you, Jill and Alyssa, for offering your time and energy for doing this workshop. I'm very, very appreciative and thankful for both of you. So this is a QR code for a workshop evaluation. If you happen to have your phone nearby and just want to go to this link real quick, it should be up and ready to go. But we also will be sending out an email after this workshop, probably in the next hour or so, maybe tomorrow, that will have a link for that event evaluation. So if you can please just fill out the evaluation, let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, how we can improve in the future. That would be, that would just mean a lot to all of us. And with that, I think we're good. Alrighty. So any last minute questions in the chat? I don't see any, but we can hang on for 2 seconds. One thumbs up. Thanks, Robert. All right, looks like just a bunch of thank yous. So thank y'all so much. Y'all have a great rest of your afternoon, month, all of the things. So bye, everyone.